Hello and welcome to today's webinar. I'm pleased to announce Victor Emanuel's webinar, Appreciating Birds in Nature More. For anyone with an interest in birds and nature, the name Victor Emanuel will ring familiar. The founder and president of Victor Emanuel Nature Tours, Victor has spent not only a career, but a lifetime of sharing the wonders and beauty of the natural world with others. On top of his pioneering role in ecotourism, Victor, both personally and through his company, has for decades been an ardent conservationist. He has received national recognition for his work to conserve endangered species and important wildlife habitat, and for his lifelong commitment to promoting the observation of birds and nature among the public. In particular, Victor will tell you that his greatest passion is for the importance of nature in shaping the lives of young people, and that his greatest achievement is the establishment of VINT's Summer Youth Birding Camp program. Victor has sat on the boards of directors of American Bird Conservancy, National Audubon, Texas Nature Conservancy, and the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. Among his many accolades, Victor is a recipient of the Cornell Lab's prestigious Arthur Allen Award and the American Birding Association's Roger Tory Peterson Award. In May 2017, the University of Texas Press published his memoir, One More Warbler, A Life with Birds. With that, I welcome Victor Emanuel.
Hello, it's good to be with you. Thank you for joining this webinar. During these challenging times, what's helping me get through them is friends, family, time in nature, and time seeing birds. I thought it would be a good chance to share with you some of my feelings about birding in nature and how we can get more out of our time in seeing birds in nature that I've evolved and come to believe after almost 70 years of being birding and being out in nature. First of all, I want to talk about how I became interested in birds. And it all started in Houston, Texas, where my mother saw a cardinal in the backyard feeding on some sunflower seeds that she had thrown out under a fig tree. My mother, Marian Emanuel, loved her garden and loved the nature around her house. And my father, Victor Emanuel, loved to take me to the Houston Zoo to see animals in the zoo and birds and other animals. So I was fortunate in having both of them as mentors, as people that get me started in nature, and many, many other people do, and they're fortunate to have that. And soon I became very excited about seeing a bird. And here is a picture of me on the Freeport Christmas count, where I just found the first rose-breasted grosbeak I'd ever seen on the Freeport Christmas count that I've started. And one of the things that always has interested me is why birds, more than any other animals, as wonderful as other animals are, have interested people for many hundreds and even thousands of years. And there's some obvious things. Color. Look at this Blackburnian warbler, one of the most beautiful warblers. In fact, Teddy Roosevelt stopped a cabinet meeting to go out and look at a Blackburnian warbler that he could see around the White House. And look at the color of this vermilion flycatcher. Incredibly beautiful bird. And this royal flycatcher and this scarlet tanager, one of the most beautiful birds in the world. In fact, Dvorak, the great composer, was walking in North Carolina one time and saw a scarlet tanager and was impressed by its beauty and incorporated some of its song in one of Dvorak's pieces that he was writing. And the kingbird of paradise in New Guinea, look at the color of red on its back, and the masked cardinal bathing there. And look at the reflection of that cardinal in the water. The whooping motmot, one of the motmots, look at the structure of the bill, the way that almost looks like it has teeth, little projections so it can hold an insect it caught, and then the different colors of blue and buff on the head of this bird. The leisurely bunting, one of the very beautiful buntings, and again the different colors of blue and rust on it. And one of the most beautiful birds in the world, the mountain bluebird, the almost ethereal bird in its colors. Again, look at the different shades of blue on this amazing bird. Birds also have the most elaborate nest of any animal except man. And here's a sociable weaver colony that they've spent a lot of time building. Here are different kinds of weavers. The Middling mask weaver has spent a lot of time building this nest. The hummingbird has constructed this intricate nest using spider webs and lichens and made this nest, the hummingbird nest. And here's the yellow-rumped cacique, a whole colony of them. And they build a nest right near where people live, because if they're near a house, it's less likely that monkeys will come and climb the tree and raid their nest. It's a little interesting thing about them. And here's the Montezuma oropendola with his great hanging nest. Again, the work it takes to build these nests. And birds also have something that we can see right out in the open during the daytime, the behavior of a bird. Other animals have interesting behavior, but it's often at night, or with fish, it's underwater. But birds, it's right out in the open. And a good example is the red-capped manakin. Manakins, the males gather. In this case, it's only one male, and other manakins, it's a group of males, and they perform a dance. They perform a display to attract the female. And the female, in the case where there are a number of manakins, selects the best dancer as her mate. So birds have behavior that we can see right out in the open. And another good example is the greater prairie chicken. I saw my first greater prairie chickens when I was about 11 years old, and was fascinated by watching the males inflate that sack on the side of their head and the eyebrows and perform this dance. And dancing, again, a group of them, with the idea that the female would select the best dancer as her mate. And so that's a wonderful thing that you get to see with birds. It's a see, and that's true of many birds. You get to see behavior right out where you can appreciate it. And then another thing about birds that has always fascinated people is their ability to fly. No other animals, including man, can perform the flights that birds perform. Look at these shorebirds flying, and look at how they're all so close together, but not touching each other, and they can all turn at the same time and go in a different direction. Amazing abilities to fly. And because they can fly, they can perform the most remarkable migrations of any animals. This bar-tailed godwit, some of them breed in northwestern Alaska, and after they've bred, they can all of a sudden leave and fly all the way to New Zealand without stopping. We know that from radio tracking. Thousands and thousands of miles over the ocean, not feeding, not stopping, not resting, flying and flying and flying to get to New Zealand. It's the bar-tailed godwit. And an even more amazing migration is the Blackpoll warbler. You see it breeds all across Canada, a few in down into the United States. But when it comes time to migrate, they go to the eastern part of Canada, to Newfoundland and New Brunswick, and right at the eastern part. And most of them migrate nonstop. Some of them would go along the East Coast, but most of them migrate nonstop all the way to South America. 3 days of flying over the ocean, the most remarkable migration of any creature, the Blackpoll warbler. And then here's some of the hummingbirds. Hummingbirds, look at the beautiful colors, but also they have the most remarkable abilities to fly. They can fly up and down and back and forth, beat their wings many, many times every minute. and have this. Here's the hooded visor bearer of Brazil, beautiful violet-capped hummingbird, a long-tailed sylph. And this sword-bill hummingbird is one of the most remarkable hummingbirds. It has, here it's feeding on this flower, and when it takes its bill out, you can see the bill is longer than the body. The only bird in the world where the bill is longer than the body that's evolved to be able to feed on flowers like that. And sometimes you get lucky to see one perch and its bill out there. And Augusto Ruschi, the great hummingbird expert in eastern Brazil that I got to meet, told me that one time he was looking at a sword-bill hummingbird that was perched, that had its bill out like that, and a little purple-backed thornbill perched right on the bill of the sword-bill hummingbird. This purple-backed thornbill has the shortest bill of any hummingbird. The swordbill has the longest bill, where the swordbill hummingbird did not like the thornbill perching on its bill, using it as a perch. And then finally, there's the marvelous spatula tail. I don't normally have birds that are particularly wanting on a kind of a list of bird I most want to see, but I've always been fascinated by this because I love hummingbirds. And this spatula tail has these long extensions of its body that come down and with a spatula at the end. And those are attached to the back, its back to the muscles. So it can move them like that, have them spread apart, and it can also move them straight up as part of its display. And I finally got to see it. It's one of the great hummingbirds. So they have the ability to fly, they have these displays, and they have these wonderful songs. And a good example is the hermit thrush has an absolutely marvelous song. The wood thrush, Audubon would, after camping at night, would wake up and hear the wood thrush singing, and that it became his favorite song. And Donald Kreutzmann, in his book, The Singing Life of Birds, wrote, "Somewhere, always, the sun is rising, and somewhere, always, birds are singing. As spring and summer oscillate between northern and southern hemisphere, so too does this singing planet pour forth song like a giant piano player, as it has now for 150 million years since the first birds appeared." So they have this wonderful ability to sing. De Vere has a beautiful song. Thoreau loved it. He made it in one of his poems. And then another thing about it that I want to talk about is about how I've talked about why more people like birds, but how you can get more out of birds and nature. And one way you can get more out of bird and nature is, most importantly, is to take time to watch what a bird is doing. A man who was running La Selva Lodge told me often he would ask birders that told him they just come and seen a wonderful bird, what was the bird doing? And they didn't have an answer. They had seen the bird, but they hadn't noticed what it was doing. With parrots, it could be one parrot grooming another parrot, allopreening they call it. If you watch the northern pintail, you could see how it puts its head straight down, its tail up in the air as it tips down to get fish. And as you take time, you will see behavior. For example, if you watch a Sprague's pipit flying high, 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 when it gets ready to end its flight, it drops like a rock. If you watch an American pipit, you'll see it comes down in a series of flight, of flying and then dropping and flying and dropping, not a straight drop. You'll see more by watching behavior like that. And also, if you take time, you will savor the moment, which is something I encourage people to do about anything in your life that's wonderful. But here's a pond near where I have a little house on the Bolivar Peninsula with about 100 egrets and herons and spoonbill and ibis and other birds feeding. And I spent 30 minutes watching the birds, enjoying their activity, but also absorbing that scene in my mind. So later in the day, and even right now, if I close my eyes and think about that pond, I see it in my brain. I have absorbed it into my brain as though it was a photograph. So savoring the moment is an important thing to do when you're birding. Take time to savor the moment. Another thing I want to talk about is that all birds are good birds. Sometimes when I'm out birding, I'll run into someone and I know what they mean. They'll say, have you seen any good birds? And I say, all birds are good birds for me. And what they mean is, have you seen anything unusual? Have you seen anything rare? And yes, I love seeing a rare bird and all of a sudden surprise of finding one or seeing one that someone else has found. Just like every birder, I love seeing an unusual rare bird. But I also love seeing a bird again that I've seen before. And Ken Kaufman, at a workshop I was leading with him, urged people to look for something on the bird that you hadn't seen before. So I was looking at a wood duck one time and I saw those red feathers coming out over the back of the, near the tail, curving down over there that I hadn't noticed before. But savor the bird, enjoy the detail, enjoy seeing it again. All birds are good birds. And a mourning dove. Appreciate the detail in common birds. There's a saying among lawyers, the devil is in the detail. For me and in nature, the beauty is in the detail. And in this mourning dove, a very common bird with a beautiful sound call, but look at the blue around the eye. Look at the pink on the sides of the neck and down on the chest. And every time you see a bird, it's different because you're different. It's a different point of your life. The sun is different. The light is different. It's a different bird. So every time you see a bird, it's a different experience. So appreciate the details. And here's another common bird, a blue jay, which fortunately has adapted to living around people in cities. And look at the different colors of blue on the top of its head. The blue on its tail is a different colored blue. The blue at the primary is a deeper blue. And you appreciate the different shades of blue and you will enjoy the bird more. The beauty is in the details. And I remember this quote from Joseph Wood Crouch, which I read in the Desert Year. One never sees anything in nature for the first time until you see it for the 50th. And that's true in the sense that the more you see a bird, the more you appreciate the detail and the beauty. And it's something that I've started doing is sitting in one place and watching what happens. Like many birders for a lot of my life, and my favorite birds are warblers, and in fact, my bird name is hooded warbler. I'm a peripatetic birder, moving, thinking around the bend, there'll be something different. There'll be a different bird. There'll be a different thing to look at. And that's fine to do that. But I decided to try as a different way is to sit in one place and watch what happens. And I was sitting on the beach at Bolivar, and here comes a yellow-crowned night heron chasing a ghost crab that hadn't gone to bed yet. And the ghost crab is going backwards, trying to get away and have its claws out in front to try to fend off the night heron. Well, that didn't work. It got caught by the night heron. The night heron pulled off all of its legs and ate it right in front of me. And you just, by seeing in one spot, you watch what happens. And another example of that is I sat at a water drip at High Island during the spring migration this last spring. And during the 3 hours I sat there, one warbler would come, like this wonderful golden wing warbler, and then there'd be a time and nothing, and a few minutes later, and you never know what will be next. All of a sudden, it would appear the Kentucky warbler coming in to bathe. And this is a warbler that's often you don't see very well. It's in the undergrowth, it's skulking, but at the water drip, you see it wonderfully. I've become very fond of water drips and bird baths because you see birds so well. And then I kept sitting there, and there was a Blackburnian warbler, which many people, it's their favorite warbler. It came in right in front of me. And then a little bit later, the common yellowthroat came in. And then I waited a little bit longer, and in came an ovenbird, which Frost wrote a whole poem about the ovenbird, a wonderful poem. The ovenbird came walking in. And then a northern water thrush. And if you see a bird in that situation like that at a water drip, you can study it. And you can see that the northern water thrush has a very short, thin bill compared to the Louisiana water thrush that has a longer, thicker bill and also doesn't have all that streaking up below. You get to study the bird. And finally, the Blackpoll warbler came in, the one that does the amazing migration. And what I find at drips is that some people come and they sit there for maybe 3 or 4 minutes and they get up and move on and they don't see anything. And right after they leave, right in, a bay-breasted warbler comes in and bays. A cerulean warbler comes in and bays. And I love the fact that you never know what's going to happen next, what's going to come in next. So sitting at one place and watching what happens, picking a spot where you can see a water drip or a view of a beach or a river or a spot where you think things may happen can be a very interesting and wonderful thing to do. And sometimes you'll get a situation where a bird you've seen many times, here's the bay-breasted warbler, you get the best view you've had in your life. And it's something to celebrate, to be happy about. I saw a bay-breasted warbler bathing this spring at that drip, and I saw the chestnut on top of the head. The sun was coming right through the trees and hitting the water right where it was bathing. And you could see that the chestnut, the bay on the throat is different from the darker bay on top of the head, almost a chestnut, and the white behind the head and the black streaking on the back and the white wing bars. And so it was the best view I'd ever had of a wonderful bay-breasted warbler. So another thing I suggest people do, yes, I chase rare birds and I get a report a rare bird has turned up and I go look for it. And I do have where I go and I'm looking for some particular bird, like when I went to look for the Kirtland's warbler, that's what I was hoping to see, and I did. It was the last warbler for me of the warblers that breed in the United States. But another thing to do often, I recommend that you do, is make your goal to see what you encounter. And if you do that, if you make your goal to see what you encounter, a bird like this painted bunting, or a bird, if you live in around Austin, the scissor-tailed flycatcher, one of the most wonderful birds that we have in Texas, the Texas paradise bird, some people call it. But what you encounter could be a beautiful dragonfly, a beautiful butterfly that's sitting out. There's always something in nature to see and enjoy. And if you make that your goal, just to see what you encounter and appreciate what you encounter, every single walk you do in nature will be incredibly satisfying and wonderful and will be a great experience. One time I was out birding and didn't see that many birds where I was walking, and my friend Brooke Smith spotted a ichneumon wasp, a wasp I had never seen. It has a very, very long ovipositor where it can bend it around and put it through the wood of a tree and lay an egg inside the tree on the larvae of beetles that are in the tree. And I had seen a film about the ichneumon wasp years ago, and here I was looking at my first ichneumon wasp. Here's another view of the scissortail. You could see that beautiful rust red on the bend of the wing, and under the wing it has a different color of red. So making that your goal is something I recommend, but I also recommend it will increase your enjoyment of birds to read books and poems that describe the beauty of birds. And I just want to recommend a few of them here. Walden is one of the most famous. Thoreau wrote about Walden Pond and what he saw about there, including the colors on pickerel that he saw in the water, birds he saw around the pond, flowers he saw. Walden is a great way to get interested, or not get interested, but to see more. Sand County Almanac, Aldo Leopold spent weekends on a farm, on a piece of property he had outside of Madison, Wisconsin, and he talked about what he saw during the year there. And it's beautifully, beautifully written. And he talked about conservation, and he's considered the father of the conservation movement. Spring in Washington, one of my favorites, and most people have never heard of. Lewis Halley was a friend of Roger Tory Peterson. He decided one spring of 1945 of all years, to ride with his bicycle with a friend around Washington, D.C. and watch spring unfold. And it's beautifully described what he saw during the months that he did that. But he also has a lot of wonderful writing about life, his view about how we should live our lives. And Journey into Summer is one of 4 books that Edwin Whiteel wrote. He wrote North with the Spring. He also wrote Autumn Across America and Wandering Through Winter. And they're all trips he made with his wife and what they saw on a trip in this one that took them all through summer, from the beginning of summer to the end of summer, from New Hampshire to Montana, down to Oklahoma and Texas, and ending up in Colorado, climbing Pikes Peak as he had the summer in. Beautifully written, and you see how observant he was and how much he and his wife saw and enjoyed. And reading books like that will make you, number one, they're a delight to read, but make you more observant and more appreciative of birds in nature. And another thing I encourage you to do is to listen to the Cornell Laboratory audio, Birds, Songs, and Literature. It was a wonderful idea of having Joseph Woodcrutch read a part of a poem, and then you hear the song of the bird that is in the poem, like it ends with Ode to a Nightingale by Keats. And so I highly encourage you to enjoy bird songs and literature, and also poetry that involve birds. Pablo Neruda grew up in southern Chile and became interested in birds and nature when he was a kid, and carried that interest throughout his life. And the University of Texas Press published a book called Art of Birds with some of his poems. And to share one with you, here's the many-colored rush tyrant, a little flycatcher that I first saw, my very first one, with my dear friend Ted Parker in Peru. And it lives in the rushes and cattails, and it's hard to see. But all of a sudden, one may come out and you see it, and you see the colors. And here is the poem that Neruda wrote. In the lagoon, the cattail, the wet reed bed, some drops alive and aflame. Suddenly a movement, a minuscule banner, a scale of the rainbow. The sun swiftly set it afire. How were its 7 colors combined? How did it assume all the light? There it was, but was not. The gust of wind is gone, perhaps does not exist, but the cattail is still quivering. And one more, Percy Bysshe Shelley, one of the most famous poets. Here's the Eurasian Skylark, and he wrote this poem to a skylark that I want to share just a few of the stanzas. Hail to thee, blithe spirit, bird thou never wert, that from heaven or near it pourest thy full heart in profuse strains of unpremeditated art. In the golden lightning of the sunken sun, o'er which clouds are brightening, thou dost float and run, like an unbodied joy whose race is just begun. The pale purple even melts around thy flight, like a star of heaven in the broad daylight. Thou art unseen, but yet I hear thy shrill delight. Better than all measures of delightful sound, better than all treasures that in books are found, thy skill to poet were, thou scorner of the ground. Teach me half the gladness that thy brain must know, such harmonious madness from my lips would flow. The world should listen then, as I am listening now. So poems about birds are wonderful. And I want to talk about how birding and being in nature changes people's lives. Here's a scene of some lovely Texas bluebonnets and one of my favorite flowers, the wine cup. And through birds and nature, we become attuned to the natural world as ancient people were. Ancient people were out in nature all the time. And being out in nature, birding and taking nature walks, we see wonderful sunsets like this one on the Rio Grande. We see sunrises. We see flowers. We see landscapes. Here we see a rainbow. And there's always out in nature so much to see. Here's the Milky Way rising over Mueller's Peak in Big Bend National Park. And so being out in nature, out birding and in nature connects us to the world. And the other wonderful thing is that at times birds, and this can happen with other aspects of nature, put us in the moment. It's something Zen practitioners want to achieve. And what I mean, and we hear people talk about mindfulness now, you're walking along and there's a rose-breasted grosbeak right in front of you eating a mulberry. And all of a sudden, you're in the moment. That's all you're thinking about. And all you're doing is enjoying the beauty of that rose-breasted grosbeak. You're not thinking about what I need to do later in the week, what task I have, what I didn't get done, what I'm going to do tonight, what's worrying me, what's bothering me, what has happened that's upset me. All of that vanishes. You're totally in the moment. And that is true with another example would be if you see a scarlet tanager in a mulberry tree. Again, you're in the moment. You're totally involved in seeing that scarlet tanager. One time I was at Palenque, and I was at the ruins of the Mayan ruins at Palenque, and all of a sudden a white hawk came out of the forest and flew over the ruins. And immediately I was in the moment along with the people that were with me. And purple martins in Austin come and form these enormous roosts, thousands of them soaring around before they go down the trees to go for the night. And when you're looking at those purple martins, again, you're in the moment. And another wonderful thing about birding and being out in birds in nature is your connections to other people. Look at this happy tour group in Panama at the Canopy Lodge, and they're with Jerry Langham, local guide Danilo Rodriguez, and Raul and Denise Arias on the far right, who built the lodge, who had it built on their property. One of the 3 wonderful lodges they have, and it has transformed tourism in Panama and contributed so much to conservation. But people that go together on tours, often they meet new friends. Some people have met someone that becomes their spouse that they've met on a tour. They keep in touch. And so birds connect us to other people. And with me, a wonderful thing that happened, I'd always wanted to get to know the King Ranch. I didn't know anyone on the King Ranch. I didn't have any involvement with the King Ranch. And then through birding, our company was asked to organize tours, birding tours on the King Ranch. And I met the lady in the center here with the Kina Alexander Ferguson, who's one of the descendants of Captain King, a wonderful conservationist interested in birds and nature. And I got invited to go with her on the King Ranch. And on the far left is Robert Bateman, the great Canadian bird artist. On the far right, his wife, Birgit Bateman, and next to her, Peter Matheson, and then Rose Styron. And all these are people that I met through birding. And also on the King Ranch, I met Leonard Stiles. Now, through birding, you meet people from all walks of life, from different backgrounds, different races, different heritage. And a good example for me was Leonard Stiles, a cowboy who ran a whole division of the King Ranch for many years, 200,000 acres that he was in charge of the cattle and the operations. And I met him through birding because when we started the tours on the King Ranch, they brought him out of retirement to be our guide, because on the King Ranch, when you're taking people out birding and looking at nature on this 800,000 acres, a part of it, there's roads and roads and roads going in all kinds of directions, hundreds of roads and no signs. And Leonard knew every road, where to go, where to turn to get to this spot we wanted to go to. So here's Leonard on the King Ranch with me and my friend Peter English, who I met when he was 12 through birding. and who helped us with our summer camps that we set up in Arizona in 1986. But I got to know Leonard and we became good friends through birding. And after September 11th, he died just a few days after that. And I drove down for his memorial service and funeral and got to meet his children. And all this because of birding. I met Leonard. And here we get connected to people from all walks of life. But here's Roland Denise again, along with me and Marshall Iliff, who used to lead tours for Event. And now it's one of the top people running eBird, again, in one of the lodges. And sharing birds with people is a very special experience. Yes, other things like sharing a sporting event or music or bowling are special times to connect with people, but there's something about sharing nature and birds with people that is a very powerful connecting experience. You share your enthusiasm and they share their enthusiasm, and you're seeing it together. And it changes people's lives. Birds and nature change people's lives. And there are two stories I want to tell about that. Howard Pyle Brokaw worked for DuPont in Wilmington. And a summer camp had been started in Maine that he sent his son to the camp called Camp Chigwonki. And later, the man who had started the summer camp was going to come through Wilmington. And he's, by the way, the man that Roger Tory Peterson dedicated his Vote, Mr. Vote, his book to him and another man. The book was dedicated to Mr. Vote because Roger had been a counselor at that camp. Well, Bill Vote was coming through Wilmington and he called Howard and said, can we have lunch? And Howard said, sure. And so they were having lunch and Bill Vote said, Howard, have you ever been interested in birds? And he said, yes, when I was younger, I used to go out and look at birds and was interested in birds. But then I got involved in other things and working at DuPont and busy, and I don't do that anymore. And Bill Vote paused and fixed Howard with a steely gaze and said, Howard, that was the biggest mistake you ever made in your life. Howard went home after lunch. His younger son was still living at home, and he yelled to him and said, get your binoculars. We're going birding. Howard became one of the great birders of the world, traveled all over the world with his wife seeing birds, came on some of our trips. I got to travel with him, became one of the greatest conservationists ever, on the board of the World Wildlife Fund, honored by conservation groups that have tremendous amount for conservation, all because Bill Vote said that was the greatest mistake you ever made. And he got back into birding. And when I was leading tours with him, we'd go to the airport and it'd be a escalator and there'd be a long line of steps. Howard would run up the steps. Birding kept him active. He lived to be 97. And another story is about Barry Lyon. He was living in Los Angeles. His father was very interested in nature and gotten him interested in nature and shared that with him, which is what parents do sometimes, or able to do that, get their children interested in nature. And there was an article in Audubon magazine about our first summer camp, which was in 1986. And Barry's father said, you might want to read this article. And he did. And he said to his parents, I want to go to the summer camp. And they called the event office and signed him up for our camp in Washington State, Camp Cascades, that Gene Hunn and Peter English were leading. And then he came to the Arizona camp and I got to bird with him and meet him. And we kept in touch and become friends. And I offered him the chance to be a tour leader for Victor Emanuel Nature Tours, and then to join our staff in Austin. He moved to Austin, and now he's our chief operating officer. It all happened because of birds connecting me and Barry. And during difficult times, birding can provide a healing experience. After September 11th, I was saddened and upset by what the terrible thing that had happened in New York and all the people that had died. And I had this thought, yes, it's awful. It's an awful time. But the geese are going to come back to Texas as they have for thousands of years. And that thought is captured in this poem by Mary Oliver Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairie and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clear blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things. And there they are, they're the geese at the Bosque del Apache, where that poem is right next to the entrance door to their visitor center by Mary Oliver, that beautiful poem. And they provide a healing experience. And an example for that was my aunt, Claudine Williams, in Las Vegas, who was one of my, I loved very much. I knew she was dying and that this would be my last trip where I could see her. And I went to Las Vegas to see her and was sitting by her bedside visiting with her. And a care person came in and said, you can leave now for a little while. I'm going to be here. So I went for a walk in a golf course near her where she lived and was very sad knowing that this would be my last time to see my aunt. And in a pond at the golf course, I saw some bufflehead, including a male bufflehead. And I knew that if I got since the light was at my back, it was a beautiful clear day, that I could see that a bufflehead is not a black and white duck. It has this beautiful green on the head and this maroon on the neck, and sometimes even a golden sheen to it. And I sat there taking in the beauty of this bufflehead, savoring the beauty of this bufflehead and its reflection in the water. That helped me deal with the pain and sadness I was feeling that this would be the last time I would see my aunt. And birders develop a caring attitude toward other creatures and the environment. And we talked earlier about bird behavior and how that is something that birds you get to see. And Lawrence Kellogg wrote in his book on watching birds, what I like about behavior watching is that it not only strengthens my bonds with the beauty of nature, but also my empathy with living things. And a good example is the purple martin, because I showed you that picture earlier of the thousands of martins that were flying around, thousands of martins, and here they are again going to roost. And my friend Kitty Coley pointed out, as I was there with her and some other friends, every one of those martins, virtually every one of those martins is living because someone cared enough to build a martin house, because they need a place to nest inside of a hole, and the holes in trees, too many dead trees get cut down right away by people, but also starlings and house sparrows use the holes. But by having a martin house that you maintain for the martins, they're able to raise their young. And the Purple Martin Society encouraged people to do that. And Kitty had a wonderful idea. She said, I hope every school can have a martin house where the children are trained how to take care of the martin house. And so all of those martins are because someone cared. And that's something birders, I think, birds cause birders to be caring people. I think birders in general are very caring people. Not only do they like sharing birds with other people, but they care about birds, and it makes them caring people. And that's a wonderful thing to have. And time in nature gives us memories that last a lifetime. Look at these scarlet ibis in Trinidad coming to roost. And look at some of the birds that I particularly have memories of seeing. The horned guan at El Triunfo, which one of my mentors, he wanted to go there and see it. He wanted to see El Triunfo, this cloud forest, but sadly, he had a flat tire, and the people that stopped to help him robbed him and shot him, and he died, and he never got to go. And so when I go, I think about one of my wonderful mentors, Armandere Montague. And then also at El Triunfo, there's the resplendent quetzal, considered by some people the most beautiful bird in the world. The tail feathers were used for the headdress of Montezuma. It can be green. It's a different light. The whole bird is blue. And I've seen it like that. And then the king penguins, if you're lucky enough to get to Antarctica. Roger Tory Peterson was like a second father to me, and his favorite place to go was Antarctica because he loved the penguins so much. And he wanted to have his bird name. My friend Edgar Kincaid, another mentor, had the idea of giving people bird names. Mine is Hooded Warbler. Roger Tory Peterson wanted to be known as the king penguin. And you can see why he loved being there and seeing that. And as Emerson wrote, in the woods is eternal youth. And what birding does, because it keeps us active, is that many birders live longer. Very few birders smoke cigarettes. I almost hardly ever see a birder smoking a cigarette. They're very active and healthy people. And I know people that have continued birding, like Howard Brokaw did. I'm sure he died at 97. And other people I know, they have very rich lives. And that's kind of summarized in this poem, not poem, but this introduction to a book that Theodore Cross wrote. Photographing birds, along with my family and work, have combined to give me, in the words of Erik Erikson, an emotionally successful life, which is what we all want, in which the inevitable despair that comes from the physical deterioration of the body is offset by a sense of personal wholeness. Whether one's career is law, business, publishing, or hauling up the flag of revolution, watching, studying, and photographing birds are superb ways of keeping one's mind off one's own mortality and staying very much alive. And that's the way I feel as I approach 80 and continue looking at birds in nature, and have enjoyed so many times with many of you, and hope to be with you again, and know that this pandemic will eventually end, and we'll be taking people all over the world to look at birds in nature and sharing our enthusiasm with you and enjoying your enthusiasm. And I want to thank you for coming to this webinar, for listening to this webinar, and I hope that you found it interesting and it will help you enjoy birds in nature more, because that will enhance your life. Now, if anyone has questions, I'd be happy to entertain them. Oh, I want to touch it for you. And I want to thank you for joining us, but I also want to thank Ben Reynolds for setting up this webinar and running this webinar for us and doing a terrific job. And our next webinar will be Michael O'Brien and his wife, Louise Omitis, who live in Cape May and who are tremendous birders and tour leaders. And I like the story about Louise, that I was at a gathering in Cape May at someone's house when I was there for the Autumn Bird Festival. And I said, someone said, why are you here? I said, because I'm a friend of Louise. And this man looked at me and said, Louise is the glue that holds our birding community together. So thank you again for coming, and I hope you'll join the next webinar and enjoy Michael and Louise's presentation.